Masechet Baba Batra Daf Yod Tet. Our Mishnah listed 4 categories of items that can potentially damage your wall or your pit if they are too close to the border in my field, and therefore I have to move them away a certain distance, and in some cases I also have to put plaster in order to protect your wall. So we're going to deal with a bunch of these examples. We're starting with the first category, which was if I have a pit or a ditch or a cave or a water channel or a launderer's pond. So in all these things, there's going to be water in them, and the water is going to seep down in the ground, and that will damage a pit that you have on your side. And therefore I have to move it a distance and or put plaster. So let's analyze the launderer's pool example. Lo shanu ela min mesan ava min hadadyan arba amot. Doing laundry back then, just like today, involved a number of steps. One of the steps was soaking. You take the clothing and soak it in some kind of soapy water that would get attached to the oily substances and loosen them. And then another step would be you move them into an area where you wash them, meaning step on it or rub it vigorously in order to move everything around. Modern washing machines also have the different cycles. Just ours take like 45 minutes, and back then it could take several days. Okay, so anyway, when the Mishnah says that you have to leave 3 tefachim from the launderer's pond, that's about the soaking pond, where the water just stays put. It's just soaking there. It's not moving. But regarding the washing pond, I have to move that 4 amot away from your wall, because there the water is splashing and sloshing and is going to travel farther. So I have to leave 4 amot. That is Rav Nachman's chidush. Tanya namehachi nibrechet hakopsin 4 amot v'anan tenan 3 tevachim ela lav shema'amina kerav Nachman. We have a Batra that supports Rav Nachman, because the Batra says that regarding a launderer's pond, you have to make it 4 amot away from the wall. But didn't we say 3 tefachim in our Mishnah? Oh, we see that now we're talking about 2 different stages, 2 different types of launderer's pools. As Rav Nachman said, our Mishnah is talking about the soaking one, and this Batra that says 4 amot is talking about the rinsing one. Some say the exact same contents, but in opposite order. First they bring up the contradiction, and then Rav Nachman comes to save the day, rather than quoting Rav Nachman first. Our Mishnah says a launderer's pond, you has to be away from the neighbor 3 tefachim. But we have Batra that says it has to be 4 amot. So what's this contradiction? Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Abu lakashya, kan min machmesan, kan min hanadyan. And Rav Nachman says the name of Rabba bar Abu. There's no problem when it says 3 tefachim. That's talking about the soaking pool, whereas the 4 amot is talking about the washing pool. Rav Chia bered Rav Avya matni lebehedya, elam ken hirchik misefat machmasan velakotel 3 tefachim. Rav Chia, the son of Rav Avya, actually has these very words in our Mishnah, and the Mishnah says you have to leave space. You cannot put it close to the border, and you have to leave from the edge of the soaking pool. And it says specifically in our Mishnah soaking pool, so that you know that the 3 tefachim is only for a soaking pool, but a rinsing pool would have to be 4 amot. So it's very interesting, even though they're all the same exact content, what's the point of transmitting it in 3 different ways? I think we can learn a lot from these types of sugyot about the method of transmission. During the entire Amoraic period, the Talmud was transmitted orally, and even afterwards. And so you see that the oral transmitters, they didn't necessarily memorize it word for word. They would memorize probably a statement, a ruling of an Amorah, that would be like word for word. But then the questions and answers, they would remember a certain structure. They would remember that, okay, we're going to bring this Mishnah, this Baraita, and this statement of Rav Nachman. We're going to bring them together. Once you have those three elements, then on your own you can say, well, I could bring the two as a question first and then bring Rav Nachman as an answer. Or I could bring Rav Nachman first and bring the Baraita as an explanation. Or someone, since Rav Nachman is explaining the Mishnah in this way, one might say, oh, when I'm reciting the Mishnah, oh, here's a gloss, here's a commentary on the Mishnah, so you know the Mishnah only means that. And so the same content would be transmitted in different ways because that's how it was remembered in different schools in different way in different times. The essence was to remember the content, the ruling, and how the ruling sheds light on the Mishnah and the Baraita, but the exact order that you put them doesn't really make a difference in memorization. Whatever memorization technique fits best with that learner. Okay, Vesad Basid, the Mishnah says that and plaster it with lime, but the letter Vav can mean and, or it could also mean or. So Ibaya Lehu, Vesad Basid Tanan, or Dilma, or Sad Basid Tanan. So the question that was asked to the sages is, does that Mishnah say and you have to keep it 3 tefachim away and plaster it? Or should we understand it 3 tefachim or plaster it? It could be it's talking about what's the language of the Mishnah, ve or o. But it could be everybody agrees that it's a vav, and the vav can mean or. So that's the question: do you have to do both of these things, or one and the other? Can it be that if I plaster the wall of the pit, then I don't have, then I can put it right up to the border, and I don't have to leave 3 tefachim, or vice versa? So pishita de vesad besid tenan, disakadatech osad besid tenan. So it says it must be that you have to do that visad means both. Because if you would think it's either or, then the second category in the Mishnah is items that like pits, date pits, olive pits, and manure that produce heat. And there it says you have to do one or the other. There it has the word o. So if this one also was o, then you could put category 1 and category 2 together. You wouldn't need to make it into 2 different categories. Why not just mix them all together? Therefore, it must be that the first category is you have to do both, and the second category is different because here it's either or. But we answer that. Dilma mishum de la dame hai hezeka la hezeka. Resha hezeka de mtuna, sefa hezeka de havla. No, maybe in fact they're both the same law. In both cases it's either or, but the reason why it's in 2 different categories is because the type of damage is different. In the first clause of the Mishnah, it's because of moisture. These are all pits that you can have water in that's going to seep down and ruin the next guy's pit. Whereas in the second, or wall of his pit, and in the second category, these are things that are cause damage due to heat. The fumes that are toxic fumes that are produced by the fermentation that happens with the seeds and the manure will cause a damage to the wall. So in each case, the law is the same, either or, but we're in 2 different categories because it's a different source of damage. Tashema, let's try to answer the question from a Baraita. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Sela babi yadayim ze chofer boro mikan, ze chofer boro mikan. Ze marchik 3 tefachim v'sad basid. וזה מרחיק 3 טווחים וסד בסיד. טעמה בידיים, הלא בא בידיים, לה. The Baraita that we saw yesterday says that according to the Yehuda, if I have rock that's very soft, it's really not even rock, it's more like just clumps of dirt that's so easy to dig that you could just, when you put it in your hand, it already crumples. And let's say I am digging a pit of this soft rock on my side, and you're also digging on your side. So I have to leave 3 tefachim away and plaster with lime, and you have to leave 3 tefachim from the border and also plaster with lime. So we see in this case it's both. We each have to remove it 3 tefachim and also plaster with lime. So what can we derive from this? Only because it's very soft soil that crumbles in one's hand, that's why you need both, because the water is going to easily seep into the other. But if it was regular soil, regular rock, then I would not have to. And our Mishnah is talking about regular soil. And so that, therefore, you do not have to do both. So is this a good proof that it means either or in our Mishnah? No, hu adin dafal gav de lo babi yadayim name sad besid. U babi yadayim istiri chale. Sakada tachamina kevan de babi yadayim lib erav chatefe ka mashmalan. No, in fact, it could be that even with soil that does not crumble in one hand, regular soil, you have to do both. And our Mishnah means you have to do both. And this Baraita had to teach us this law also regarding soft rock that crumbles in one hand, because I might have thought, since it's so crumbly that it crumbles in my hands, I have to move it far away even more than three tefachim. So therefore it's teaching the chidush that it doesn't make a difference whether the soil is regular soil or whether it's rock that crumbles in one's hand. It's the same law for both, that you have to leave 3 tefachim, not more. And you also have to put plaster. So in the end, we have no proof this way or the other. Now, in the second category of the Mishnah, I mentioned olive refuse and manure and salt and lime and rocks, these glowing rocks, or maybe they're like uranium rocks that cause heat. All of these have fermentation or chemical processes that they actually do cause heat. So, and in these cases, you have to move it 3 handbreadths from the wall or plaster it. Tenanatam, bame tomnin do bame en tomnim. We're going to now compare this Mishnah here in Masechet Baba Batra to a Mishnah in Masechet Shabbat, because the law there is that if I have hot food that I made from before Shabbat and it's cooked, and now I want to insulate it so that I can eat it later on Shabbat while it's still nice and hot. So am I allowed to do that? It depends. I am allowed to insulate it in something that will just keep the warmth, but not add more warmth. That's permitted. But I'm not allowed to insulate it in these types of radioactive rocks and lime and things that have chemical processes that increase heat, because that is kind of like cooking it by increasing heat and making it hotter than it already is. And so the Mishnah asks, what can you use for insulation and what can you not use for insulation? And the answer is en tomnin lo begefet velo bezebev lo bemelach velo besid velo behol ben nachin ben yeveshin may shenacha de katane selaim velo katane chol umay shenatam de katane chol velo katane selaim. So the Mishnah in Masechet Shabbat says one is not allowed to insulate with, and it has the same items as in our list, not with olive pits or manure, nor salt, nor lime, but here it has sand. So this one includes sand. Whether they're wet or dry, doesn't matter, it's still not allowed. So now we're asking, these lists seem to be the same, and it makes sense, they're the same principle. It's because it increases heat, that's why it will cause damage to a wall, and that's also why you're not allowed to use it to insulate Shabbat, because it's further cooking the item. So what's the difference here that it says in our Mishnah Baba Batra? It teaches rock. That's not allowed, right? That was one of the items. And it doesn't say sand, but in Mishnah in Masechet Shabbat, it says sand, but it doesn't say rock. So why is there the difference? It looks like it should be the same list that was, originated in one place. Here's all the items that increase heat. So why do the lists have one item that is different? Amar Rav Yosef, Rav Yosef says it's based on the context. In Masechet Shabbat, most people don't insulate in rocks. You might have a pile of rocks in your field, that makes sense, but you're not going to insulate something in radioactive rock. It's just not a normal thing to do, so that's why I didn't list it. But Abaye countered, is it the normal way of people to insulate with wool fleece and parts of purple wool? That's also unusual to do. And yet, the Baraita lists them, the Tanya Tomnin begizeh semer ubesifeh semer ubilshonot shel gamad mochin ve'en metaltelin otan. Baraita says that you can insulate food on Shabbat with wool fleece, combed wool clumps, tabs of purple wool, swatches of soft material, but you can't move them because they're mukseh. So all these items, the reason they're mukseh is because you're going to use them to make clothing, and you can't make clothing on Shabbat. So these are just raw materials that you're going to use. These are expensive materials, right? They're dyed with these expensive dyes, and so that's why people aren't going to use it for anything else. And so generally, people are not going to use these expensive cloth pieces of raw material for insulation. You just leave them on the side. not use them on Shabbat, and then during the week you're going to use them to make nice clothing. Now, even though it's unusual to use these things, yet the Braita goes and lists them anyway. And so to our Mishnah, it should list rocks, even though it's unusual to use rocks for insulation for food, but nevertheless, you should list it because we do list unusual items. Some people might use it. Ela marabaye, yagid alav re'o, tenacha selaim behuadin lechol, tenahatam chol behuadin lestaim. Abay has a different answer based on a pasuk in Yob that says his neighbor tells about him. These two Mishnayot are neighbors, and since everybody knows both of the Mishnayot, each one will inform on the other. And so when I read this one, I'll say, oh, this is missing chol. Oh, but the chol applies here also because it's in the neighbor. And this one doesn't say rock, but the neighbor said rock. And so they can help each other and fill in each other. And in fact, both are true. Rava says that's not how this rule works of it, its neighbor will tell about him. When you want to use that rule, that's when you don't want to be so verbose and repeat everything. So the way that typically works is, in one place, you'll list all of the items. In the other place, you'll list just one of the items. And then you'll know, oh, this has one of the items. I know that's from that list. Oh, it's just an abbreviation for the entire list. And if you want the rest of the list, go look over there. It's just a cross-reference. And that way, you can save space, or mental space, or written space if it's oral or written, and that's how it works. But here, it's the same number of items in both places. Why would you repeat all of them? Except this one, you say it here, but not there. So therefore, Rava rejects that answer of Abaye. Elama Rava. Hatam hainu tamad lakatane selaim mishum demistak demistechi la kedera. Hachanu tamad lakatanichol mishum de mechamime chaim umekarere karier. Rava says I have a different explanation. Each one is contextual. The reason why it doesn't say rocks when it comes to insulating food is because the rocks will actually scratch and break a pot. So it's not that it's unusual to do. It's impossible. Nobody does that, right? It would be silly to list rocks there when no one is going to insulate food with rocks. And so that's why it doesn't say it there. And in our Mishnah, that's why in Mishnah Shabbat, it doesn't say rocks. And here it doesn't say sand because sand would not actually be a problem for a wall. And sand only increases heat for something that's already hot. So it's good for insulation because if something's hot, it will increase heat. If it's cool, it will keep it cool. So sand is good for insulating food. But if it's not around something that's already hot, sand is not going to produce its own heat, and therefore it will not cause damage to a wall. And that's why it doesn't list sand in our Mishnah here in Masechet Batra, because sand is actually permitted. It doesn't have a chemical reaction that produces heat. It's fine. But if it's near something hot, maybe the heat will initiate some chemical reaction in the sand that will make the sand produce even more heat. But if it's not next to a source of heat, then it's fine. So you could put it right next to a wall. Hold on, now we have a question because Rabbi Oshaya has a version of a Baraita here in Masechet Baba Batra that mentions sand, that you're not allowed to put that right near a wall. So if it's allowed, then what's the problem? Why if it's allowed, then why does Rabbi Oshaya say include it in the list of things that are not allowed to put next to a wall? You just told me that it doesn't produce heat on its own. Hatam bim tuna. No, over there it's talking about damp sand. When it's damp, then it does cause damage. In that case, the author of our Mishnah should also include sand, and we'll say it's talking about wet sand that does cause damage. So if sand does cause damage when it's wet, then we should include it in our Mishnah as well. So why'd we leave it out? Oh, because we already included wetness when we talked about a water channel. So water channel causes dampness. So I just bring one example of something that causes dampness. I don't have to bring everything that's possibly wet in the world. So it's already included in the water channel. Hold on, the Mishnah mentions multiple things that cause damage by moisture. It included a water channel and a launderer's pond. So since it's mentioning multiple items, why not mention moist sand as well? And the answer is Hanu Siriche. No, I need these two, water channel and the laundress pond. I would not be able to derive one from the other. Why? Because if it just said a water channel is always flowing with water, constantly, 24/7, all year round. But a laundress pond is not fixed, is not always used, only during laundry time, laundry day. Then I fill it up, I do the laundry, however long that takes, maybe it takes 2 days, 3 days, and then I empty it out. And so for a lot of the time it's empty. So I might have thought that for a laundress pond, since it's empty a lot of the time, I could put it right up to the wall. That's why I need the laundress pond. And if I had only the laundress pond, I would think that's a problem because it's still water. It's just sitting there, and that's likely to seep out. But a water channel is moving water, and therefore the water would rather move ahead, go downhill, rather than seep down into the ground. And so I would think that maybe there's no seepage or less seepage for a water channel, and that would be permitted to put right next to the wall. And therefore I need that one also to teach me not so. So there's a good reason why I need to teach these two examples, whereas the moist sand is not a chidush. I could learn that from the other ones, that moisture in general, anything that's moist is going to be a problem for the wall, and that's why I didn't need to include this in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yoshaya included it? Okay, good. He could include it. He wants to tell you that law, but it's not necessary to teach in our Mishnah. Okay, now the next example in the Mishnah is that if you have seeds, I can't plant seeds next to your wall because they're going to grow and weaken the soil. Also, I'm not allowed to plow right next to your wall because the plowing is going to weaken your soil, and also urine. I can't put next to your wall. That's going to damage the foundation of the wall. Zera'im. Now, why do I need all of these particular examples? Why not just write plowing? And once you write plowing, so then I'll know that, what am I plowing for? Is it not to put seeds? So just write plowing, and then I'll know. If I can't plow, then obviously I can't seed also. And the answer is b'mapolet yad. There are cases where you actually can seed without plowing, and that's when you do it by hand. You just put it in a few at a time, and you use a shovel, and you don't have to plow. So therefore, I have to know that also is not allowed. Even if I'm putting seeds without plowing, that's not allowed. That's why I need the seeds. So now we ask the other way around. Why not just say I can't put seeds? And then I know sometimes I put seeds with plowing, sometimes not. But no matter what, if I'm plowing, it's because I'm putting seeds. So I already know from seeds that I would have to move it away. And I couldn't plow there also. And the answer is bechodesh lailanot. Sometimes I'll plow not for a seeding, but rather for planting trees, little plantlings that I'm putting there. So I need to know that, and that would not be included in seeding. Hold on, you don't have to tell me about planting trees. You don't have to include plowing to teach me about planting trees, because I would know planting trees is not allowed because they need irrigation. And we already talked about water channels. And so I would know that I can't plant trees because I'm going to have to bring water there to water the trees. And the answer is the author of this paraita is composing it in the land of Israel. And in the land of Israel, the Sefer Devarim says, this is a land that drinks water as the rain of heaven comes down. So because water channels are not necessary in Israel, we depend on the rain. Therefore, I'm not necessarily going to put water channels, and that's why you have to teach me that plowing is not allowed, because that way I know that planting trees right next to someone's border is not allowed. Now, how come putting seeds in the ground is not allowed? Because it's going to weaken your wall. So are we to infer from this that when you put a plant, when you seed a plant, that the roots are going to go sideways, and that's why since they're going to go sideways, they're going to go and damage the foundation of the wall. However, we see from a Mishnah Masechet Kilayim that that seeds grow down, but they don't grow sideways. The roots don't grow sideways. V'atanan, hamabrichat hagefen ba'aretz, im en al gaba afar shelosha tefachim, lo yabi zera aleha, v'tane ala aval zoret hastadin, elach ve'elach. It says, if someone wants to bend a grapevine, so to my kilayim, you're not allowed to have a grapevine and another other vegetation planted right next to it. We're talking here not about a vineyard. If it's a whole vineyard, meaning 5 vines or more, then you can't put other plants anywhere nearby. But here we're just talking about one vine. So if it's just one vine, you can have it nearby as long as the roots aren't going to be touching each other. But as long as the roots are not, then it's okay. So this Mishnah says that you cannot, if you're doing this bending, this is where you'd have one vine like this, and you want to make another vine. So you take one of the vines and you bury it into the ground, and then bring it back up. And then eventually it will grow a brand new vine from that. And so that's a good way to get another new vine. Now, the law is that if when you put it down below, if you put it deep down below, more than 3 tefachim, then you can put other vegetation right on top because it's 3 tefachim away from that vine. So that's permitted. It's not going to go so deep. But if it's less than 3 tefachim, like on this picture, it's only a little bit, then I cannot put it on top because that's too close to it. That's what the Mishnah says. Now, we taught regarding that Mishnah that if you put it on this side or that side, that's okay. I could put it over here on this side, over here on that side, that's permitted. And so what we see here is that we don't worry about vegetation that its roots are going to go sideways. If you were worried about that, then you wouldn't be able to plant anywhere nearby. We're only worried about it going down more than 3 tefachim, but it's not going to go sideways. So this is a contradiction. If it doesn't go sideways, as we see from the Mishan Kilayim, then I should be able to put vegetation right next to your wall because it will go down, but the roots aren't going to go sideways and damage the wall. Amar Rabbi Chaga b'shem Rabbi Yoseh mipnei shemachalidin et hakarka umalin afarti choach. And the reason why you can't put vegetation near walls because it's going to break up the ground and cause loose soil to rise up. It's not that the roots are really going to go into the wall, but rather it's going to make the soil underneath loose, and then it's going to make it all bumpy, and that will cause damage to the foundation of the wall. The Mishnah mentioned that one has to distance urine from someone else's wall 3 tefachim because it will damage the foundations of that person's wall. Amar Rabba bar Chana mutar le'adam lashtin mayim besadkot lo shel chavero dichtib v'ichrati lacha mashtin bekir ve'asur ve'azub be'Yisrael. Rabba bar Chana teaches that one is permitted to urinate against someone else's wall, and he learns that from the pasuk regarding the threat to Achav, that Hashem is going to destroy all those who urinate against walls in Achav's house. We understand the meaning right now to mean males who urinate standing up. And we learn from here that although Achav is evil and his house is evil and they'll all be killed, but the point that we are deriving is that it's permitted to urinate against a wall. However, how can Rabba bar Chana teach this if our Mishnah says that one has to distance urine from someone else's wall 3 tefachim? So then that would not be permitted. And the answer is Hatam b'shofchin. Our Mishnah that says it's prohibited, and you have to move it 3 tefachim away. That's talking about emptying a chamber pot. There, it's a lot of urine that's all being poured at once, and that amount will cause damage. However, if it's just an individual who's urinating against a wall, that's not so much, and therefore it's permitted. Tashema lo yishpoch adam mayim besad kotlo shel chavero elem ken edchik mimenu shelosha tefachim. So wait, let's compare what Abba bar Chana says to this braita that says a person is not allowed to pour water next to the wall of his friend, unless he removes it 3 tefachim. And we're understanding the phrase pouring water to mean urinate. And so this baraita would seem also to contradict Rabba Bar Chana, and says that a person is not allowed to urinate against someone's wall directly. He has to leave 3 tefachim. And we answer hatamname b'shofchin. Now this is also talking about emptying a chamber pot, which would be a lot of urine and not just one person urinating. Tashema lo yashin adam mayim besad kotlo shel chavero, ela im ken erchik mimenu shelosha tefachim. B'amedrim amorim bekotel lebenim, aber bekotel abanim b'chdei shelo yazik, v'chama tefach. However, we're going to have a final disproof from this baraita that says a man is not allowed to urinate against someone else's wall unless he distances himself 3 tefachim. So there you go, it's not allowed. Now it clarifies, when do we say it's not allowed? You have to leave 3 tefachim if it's a brick wall. But if it's a stone wall, then it has to be you have to move away an amount that you will not cause damage. And that is a tefach. A stone wall, stones are stronger than bricks, and so you only have to move away 1 tefach. And if it's hard rock, then one is allowed to urinate directly on it because that's very hard and will not cause damage. But the point is that a regular wall, one has to move away from it 3 tefachim. And this is a contradiction against Rabba Bar Chana, and therefore he is rejected. Hold on, Rabba Bar Chana, he quoted a pasuk, which is a higher authority than a Mishnah, and therefore he has good proof, so we should not reject him. What are we going to do with that pasuk? Hatam hachi kamar, afilu midi de darke lishtune, bekir la shabik nale umayniu kalba. No, now we're reinterpreting that pasuk to say, even a dog which normally pees against walls, God will destroy everything. In other words, everything in Achav's household, not only the people, but even the dogs will be destroyed. So that's what it's talking about, the urinating against the wall. It's not talking about males, and therefore there's no proof from that pasuk that a human is permitted to urinate against someone's wall. Amar bi Yitobe, bar Kisna ba'amar Shemuel, rakik eno mema'et bechalon. Now we're going to introduce a topic that seems to have nothing to do with our topic here. We're going to see in the continuation of the discussion tomorrow, it's going to relate to vegetation that grows next to a wall that causes damage. But we're not going to get to that part today. So we're just going to introduce the idea. Okay, we're talking about a corpse that's inside a room, and if it has a window that's of a certain size, then the corpse impurity will not only make everything in that room impure, it will travel through the window and make everything in the next room also impure, if the wall is big enough. Now, if there's a wafer, like a cracker, that's in the wall, and if you count the wafer like part of a wall and closes up the hole of the window, then it would be less than the size that tum'ah would pass through. So Shemuel says, a wafer is not considered something that closes up a window. It has to be something more substantial that you're going to leave there and becomes like part of the wall. It's closing up the window. Then that closes up the window. But a wafer is not considered something that is an obstruction to the tum'ah. Now, now we ask about Shemuel. Why is he talking about a wafer, a cracker? Why not talk about a thick chunk of bread and say the law about that? That if you have some bread in the window, then that also does not make stop the tum'ah. Lami baya kamar, lami baya abed kevandi chazele lami batele, aber akiktim as ema betule mi batele kamash malan. Oh, in fact, it would be the same law for a wafer or a thick piece of bread. But it wants to teach us an extra chidush. Not only a thick piece of bread that is fit to eat, and since it's fit to eat, when I put it on the windowsill, I don't mean to leave it there. I'm just putting it there for a little while, and then I'm going to go get it. So therefore, I am not nullifying it and considering it part of the wall. So for sure there, it's not going to be part of the wall and stop the tum'ah. But even, Shemuel's giving us a bigger chidush, that even a wafer, since a wafer is thin, when I put it on the windowsill, it's going to get disgusting just from the moisture on the window. and I'm not going to eat it, and I'm nullifying it. I'm just going to leave it there. So I might have thought in that case that it becomes nullified, and then therefore becomes part of the wall that closes up the airspace of the window. And now the window will be small enough that the tum'ah will not pass through. I might have thought that. Then that's why Shemuel teaches me not so, that the wafer does not obstruct the impurity. And now we ask about Shemuel. Why does he have to teach us this? I would know this anyway from a different angle. That a wafer is something that is susceptible to tum'ah. Any utensil or food is susceptible to tum'ah, and therefore we have a rule. Anything that's susceptible to tum'ah is not going to be a blockage from tum'ah passing through. So I would know just from that law that the wafer is not going to block the tum'ah. And we answer, shenilosh b'mei perot. This is a wafer that was kneaded with fruit juice, not with water. And the law is that things are not susceptible to tum'ah unless first there's a hechsher, unless first they become wet with one of 7 liquids like water and wine and others. But fruit juice is not one of the 7 liquids, and therefore, since the ingredients of this wafer never got wet with one of the 7 ingredients, it's not susceptible to tum'ah, and that's why I wouldn't know this law just from this angle. A challenge to Shemuel. I have a basket full of straw or a barrel full of dried figs. And they're placed in the window. So we consider if the straw or the figs would stay the way they are, even without the basket. In other words, if I took away the basket or took away the barrel, if the straw just would stay there and close up the window, or the figs would stay there, then I consider them a barrier, and that closes up the window, and the tum'ah will not go through. But if not, if it's dependent on the basket or the barrel, then it's not a barrier, and the tum'ah will go through. Now we ask, the straw, even if the straw stays there on its own, why should the straw be a barrier? After all, straw, although humans don't eat it, you can use it to feed your animal, and therefore you're not making it batel. You're not considering leaving it there. You're just storing it there for temporarily, and then you're going to take it to feed your animal. So it should not be considered part of the wall that closes up the window. It should be considered something that you're going to take away. And we answer besariya. We're talking about rotten straw that even the animals won't eat. Hold on, it's still useful for clay, for bricks. You put straw in it and it makes the brick stronger. It has thorns in it, and therefore it's not useful for making clay. Chazila hasaka, no, but you can still burn it. It's good for fuel. Bim tuna, no, it's moist, and therefore you can't burn it. Chazila sekadol, you can still throw it into a big fire. Even if it's wet, it will catch fire because it's such a big fire. No, it's not common to have such big fires, and therefore, since it's moist and rotted, so this straw I'm not going to use, and I'm putting it there, and it can stay there by itself, and therefore it's considered a barrier that closes up the window, and the tum'ah does not go through. Now we ask similar question regarding the figs. Gerogarot hachazuleh. Well, they're good to eat, so therefore I'm not going to leave them in the wall. I'm going to take them and eat them, so they should not be a barrier. Amar Shemuel b'shehitirifu. They became worm infested, so no one's going to eat them. V'chen Tani Rabba bar Abu b'shehitirifu, and Rabba bar Abu also teaches that it's a case where the figs became worm infested, so I'm just going to leave them there, and they're batel, and therefore they're considered that they close up the window. Hi, chavit hechidamya. Now, you mentioned the barrel. Now, what kind of barrel is it? Idepuma lebar hi gufa tehos. If the opening of the barrel, we're assuming it's a earthenware barrel, if it's facing outwards, then the barrel itself will be a barrier, because there's a law regarding earthenware vessels that they can only become tameh if the tum'ah is on the inside, the opening of the barrel. So if the barrel is facing into the room where the corpse is, then yes, the barrel will become tameh. But if it's facing outwards, so then it will not become tameh, because a barrel cannot receive tum'ah from its outside. And in that case, the barrel itself should be a blockage from the tum'ah going through. So why do we have to say, we look at to see if the figs would stay on their own? The barrel by itself would block tum'ah. Ela b'depuma legav. Rather, it must be that the opening of the barrel is towards the inside, and that's why it does become tameh. Or we can say that, in fact, it's talking about a barrel that is facing outwards, but it's not earthenware, it's a metal barrel. A metal barrel can receive tum'ah from the outside, and therefore the barrel by itself is not going to block the tum'ah, and that's why we have to ignore the barrel. And we see the pits, the dates by themselves, or the straw, if they would stay there without the barrel or without the basket, and they're in such a state that they're not going to be used for anything, then they close it up. And we'll continue with this line of questioning on the next daf. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.